Haynes, they couldn't sleep. They had the whole roof redone. And we can't sleep with this. And then the herons would get on and then they slide down.
You ready now?
Ready to go?
Okay, I will call the May 28th, 2024 City of Coburg Urban Renewal Agency Budget Committee meeting to order at 6:02 p.m. First up is roll call.
We have Director Wells is absent. Director Engelbretson.
Here.
Lyman.
Here.
Smith.
Here.
Fox is absent. Kreger.
Here.
Laundry.
Here.
Tryon is absent. Todd Waters is also absent. Terry Dawson.
Here.
Jeff Mom.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Great, thank you. Do we have any public comment tonight?
We do not.
Thank you. Next up is minutes approval. And they are attached to the agenda. And hopefully you had a chance to look at them. They're pretty short. Won't be probably as difficult to remember that. Any questions or clarifications on the minutes? I'm happy to entertain a motion.
I move to approve the minutes of May 30th for the Urban Renewal Agency meeting.
Is there a second?
I actually do have a correction.
Right.
Looks like on page 2, they got Director Milam. I don't know when I got promoted, but I wasn't here, didn't make any move, didn't move nothing.
So you didn't make a motion?
Did you
Or
think
you're
about
just
it?
not a director?
Are these
Last
last,
year.
oh, they're last year's?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I thought they were last meeting. Okay, got you. Nope, sure.
Okay,
Probably
great.
had been.
If you
All right.
can remember
You now
a year
remember.
ago, I'm applauding. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
He
Definitely did.
remembers now.
Great. All right. Well, how about a second then?
second.
Okay, seconded by Terry to approve. Any questions before we vote? Okay, all those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Abstaining. The minutes pass. And next up then is the budget message for the Urban Renewal Agency budget.
All
I'll
right.
turn it over to you, Adam.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Urban Renewal Agency directors. So this budget is a relatively straightforward. I put together a one-pager for the overall message, and about half of it is just kind of a history of what the Urban Renewal Agency exists in Coburg for. Every urban renewal agency has a different kind of mission and a purpose in different communities. Coburg's is almost exclusively to currently to fund a portion of the debt service for the wastewater treatment system, both the treatment plant and the step system improvements that were done in, I believe, 08, but the URA was established in 2001. Gave a little background on how they work and what they have to do is technically show blight and all those things, but that's kind of the historical reference. For the budget for this year, typically what occurs, there's just a few things that happen in a URA budget, and the predominant one is a movement of funds that are property tax collections for the URA that then once a year move out of the URA, which is its own general ledger, and into the city's general ledger system as well, we had a debate with our auditors last year, whether it's a transfer or whether it's an expense and a revenue. It ended up being an expense and a revenue is how they're treated. So it's rather than a transfer technicality. And it was 375,000 for the past few years. With the increase in valuation there and the fund growing a little bit, we propose to have move up the debt payment amount to 400, so slightly up from 375, which has been at least in the recent years past history. And then there's in addition to that debt service payment, there's a few administrative costs that the URA we're eligible to have the URA pay for. The primary expense is the URA's audit. They have a component unit audit that, and I think it's 6,000 this year, rises each year, obviously. So the URA can pay for that, and there's a few other administrative expenses that URA can pay for, but the vast majority is the debt service payment to the city into the wastewater fund. What we also included in the forecast outlooks are what would it look like if the payments were accelerated? The fund balances can take on a little higher payments over the next few years if we wanted to. That's not part of tonight's proposal. It just indicated in those future years. We think it may be beneficial to accelerate that. The cap is really a dollar cap rather than a time thing. So 9 million is the maximum that the URA can contribute to the debt of the city. So if we accelerate the annual payments, it finishes faster. And so we don't have to do it that way. What we'd like to do over the course of this year is to look at the model and see how does that impact pro and con wastewater rates. I think it may have a beneficial, potentially, well, depends on how you want to strategize, because we do need more revenue, but it may help us in the timeframes where we are waiting on larger capital expenses in the 3 to 6 year window. So if we accelerate and have a higher payment coming from the URA to the city, that may help us build cementing fund balance in the wastewater fund that we are currently really, really tight on. So that's just a starter kit strategy, but that's not for the proposed budget. The proposed budget is just to move from 375,000 to 400,000, just a slight increase because the money is there and it can't be used literally for anything else. So that is the budget. The format on the following page of the summary of the budget is the same as the city's. And you can see there that there's, looking at the future years, it goes down to the final year of the forecasted, that fiscal year 28, gets us near completion of the fund balance. And we'd have to look at we have to do some kind of total historical of the URA to make sure that we're hitting right at that $9 million mark. So that's again in a future years 3 or 4.
Yes,
Two
questions?
questions. Maybe you answered that. I didn't quite understand it, but if and when does the debt expire, and what is the remaining balance now?
So the overall wastewater debt?
Well,
Or-
if I'm understanding this right, we owe a debt on this Urban Renewal Agency fund. So what is the current balance of that debt, and when is it expected that that debt would be expired?
Okay, so this is a portion, the URA pays for a portion of that debt, up to 9 million of the overall debt. That would be this portion would end up being, the URA would complete its obligation before the overall debt instrument is paid off. So once the 9 million is reached on the URA, it doesn't have to die and close out. URA can sit there with, I don't know, just like a savings account with $5 in it, or I don't know what the minimum it has to have in it, but it could sit there, and then we'd have a conversation about what maybe its future usefulness is. But the wastewater debt goes on way past that, and so after the 9 million is reached from the URA, the remainder of the debt on the books is just in the wastewater fund that rates will be required to be used to pay for. So we won't have the assistance of the URA. And we could get into a whole other thing about how retiring out the URA in total and getting rid of the boundary potentially increases general fund revenues because you're now not separating it out and targeting that. So there's a whole conversation to be had in future, in probably the next, 12 to 24 months about that. So does that answer your question?
I'm just really still kind of confused about this. Is there a debt obligation that we owe?
The URA doesn't have its own debt obligation that it owes. The URA is contributing to the overall wastewater system debt service that we have, up to $9 million. So once the contribution of the URA is completed, that once we hit that 9 million, that stops. And then in future wastewater fund budgets, the debt service that's in there of about 680, 700,000 is going to be wholly borne by the wastewater fund and by rates. So we'll definitely be having some rate conversations as URA tapers off and the debt remains, because there's about $375,000 to $400,000 gap that the wastewater fund will have to find revenues to support.
So we're proposing a payment of $411,000 for 2025.
400,000 goes to the debt service, 11,000 is for administrative costs.
So 400,000 goes to the $9 million.
It goes to the wastewater. It goes as a movement from the URA to the city's wastewater fund into the debt service that pays a portion of the annual debt service payment. The $9 million is the total indebtedness capability of the URA. The overall debt for the construction of the wastewater plant and system is much more than 9 million.
So we're paying $400,000 this next year and 600,000 the following year, 612 following year. How far out does that go?
That would nearly complete. That would complete plus or minus a few months, a portion of a year. We have to get it fine tuned. But yeah, the idea with that strategy would be, as you look at the end of fiscal year 28, that means that the debt service payments from the URA would end, movement to the city would be done.
What kind of decisions would we make then going forward? Do we encumber more funds to use or debt?
URA that's a council conversation about, is there value in attempting to generate new projects for the URA? That's what you have to do. And then you can look at what is the proposed or estimated revenues from the tax increment finance amounts with the valuation over time to see how much potential revenues there are to pay for those projects over time, or not doing that and having that money that was dedicated and funneling to the URA instead be spread back out and be done more traditionally, which would be a higher amount of property tax revenues to the general fund. So there's policy implications either way. Do you keep it narrow focused and try and re-up it for some wastewater purposes, or water? I mean, for you have to meet some definitions of blight and economic development, or do you retire it and have more revenue into the general fund in property taxes, but have a challenge in your debt service side in the wastewater?
So the revenue that comes into the URA could come directly into the city if we chose not to.
Once it ends, right? Once it ends, the council could dissolve it, and then all of that that valuation in the boundary area that is the URA, that boundary line would dissolve and go away, and then all of that taxable up to our $3.75 would just be general fund property tax revenue.
So it
Yeah.
doesn't have to go into the URA. It could go into the city fund instead.
Only if the URA dissolves. Only if you make a decision to
Is there
dissolve
an
the URA.
advantage for us to dissolve it and have it come into the city
If
fund?
if I might just interject here, for the purpose of time tonight, I think this would be a great topic for a council work session to get all of us up to speed on what the URA can be used for, what the benefits, and this is going to take staff some time to pull this together. So if that will satisfy
Yeah.
the group.
But
Yes.
this is
Yeah, you've identified the
Knowing
crux.
Really what this is.
Yeah, you've identified the crux of it, and that's the future conversation is what are the pros and cons of each path? And they both have pros. They just shift where the pinch points are.
Any other questions? Discussion. Right, I have to take a note there.
I just
okay.
wanted to add more things to next year's minutes, that's all.
And you better be here and remember.
Remembering now so we can approve them.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, well, if there aren't any more questions or clarifications, I am happy to entertain a motion. And it looks like there's a suggested motion on the back that you could use.
I move to approve the Urban Renewal Agency 2024-25 fiscal year budget in the amount of $664,355 and approve a request for the Coburg Urban Renewal Agency Plan area for a maximum amount of revenue that may be raised by dividing the taxes under Section 1C, Article 9 of the Oregon Constitution and ORS Chapter 457.
Second.
I didn't know what I was getting into. when
Yeah,
I
you
started. Very
Okay,
technical.
so we have a motion and it has been seconded. And I won't repeat it. Thank you. That was well done. So do we have questions before we vote? Or clarifications from anyone? Okay, all those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed would say nay. Abstain, anyone? Okay, great, that passes. And so
Yeah.
I then adjourn the URA meeting at 6:18 p.m. Give me 1 second to shuffle. Okay, I will call to order the Budget Committee meeting at 6:19 p.m. Roll call.
So now you guys are budget committee members, and I'm just going to go over who's absent. We have Todd Waters, Laura Tryon, and Alan Wells are absent. So we do have a quorum with 8 voting members tonight.
Okay, great, thank you. Do we have anyone to provide public comment tonight?
There is not.
All right, next up are our follow-up questions and information from the city from last meeting, and I'll turn it over to Adam again.
Great. So there's a memo in the packet right after the agenda. There is budget meeting number 1, follow-up Q&A. I put together a little summary response to the questions that we received. I can go through all of those. I'll add that in the packet, there are 2, I've noted them in these answers that there was more detail coming, and there that is in the form of these 2 documents here. One is the same budget line item detail that was in budget meeting 1. I've added the column of the total dollar change between last budget year and the proposed budget. The total dollar change and then the percent of change. I'm not sure, it may have some utility. I highlighted all of them that are over 20%. There's quite a bit, especially a lot of the line items are relatively small line items. So you change $200 in $1,000 line item and it created a 20%. So it looks maybe more shocking than it is. The ones that have significant dollars on them are ones that we really, I hope, covered fairly well in meeting 1, which are the changes in capital and a lot of the timing of where the capital project progress is relative to the fiscal year, and estimating how much is in 1 year versus another when a project is underway. And then as a staffing allocation change also kind of made this harder to utilize because we're changing to a direct allocation rather than the everything in the general fund and then transfer. So for what it's worth. That was a request, and it has, you know, it may have some utility, and glad to answer any particular questions. A few others in here when I was going through it, were really more of an internal thing about some of the line items were either reduced to zero because we're budgeting them in a different line item now, or we found that we weren't consistently applying either a revenue or an expense to one line item, and it was partial. And we identified that when we were going through our end of year estimates. Well, sometimes it went here and sometimes it went there just on accident. So to correct them budgetarily for the future year, it shows a big percent differential when really it's not. It's just taking two separate lines and choosing which one they actually going to belong in into the future years. So that's there. And then this is relating to one of the questions as well, which is the street tree utility fee history that was requested, revenue and expense. So just want to make sure you saw that those were there, and I can go through these really quick, or can just take questions. Well, I don't know what preference of the group is. Wouldn't mind highlighting them if you'd like, but don't need to.
I think as far as the budget changes, it was primarily looking at any big changes, you know, like the top 5 or, you know, it wasn't I don't know. I can't speak for everyone else that had asked for that in the past, but just to get a sense of something that made a major shift.
Yeah, and we talked about it as a staff, and you know, we really didn't have a whole lot this cycle in the way of kind of discretionary things like purchasing. I think, you know, last year, the year prior was a street sweeper. You know, that's
Right.
one that, you know, didn't have to legally expend, but there was a decision operationally and policy wise to do that. So that one would be one that I think, like you're talking about, that would be an obvious one to highlight. As I said, most of these that had significant changes were relating to capital projects and people. But I've identified that kind of in the budget message with the budget assumptions. The other one that showed up here, both on the expense and the revenue side, were anything that was relating to development. Our SDCs are much lower projected than prior years because we're looking at what we see as a little more flattening of how the development activity is going in the community. So that one, most of the ones that are related to development on both revenue and expense are down more than 20%. So they show up highlighted here.
Other questions or clarifications from the information we have?
And just about this or about the whole budget?
Well, just about this for now, but I did want to get to that one next. Yeah.
Let's start with this part.
One I did want to make sure we hit because it came up, and it is second to last question, biennial budget. And I've snuck that idea out in a couple different meetings, and it was requested that it be discussed here, which makes total sense. You know, in technical terms, that it's a decision of the council. I've brought it up just conceptual. You know, council as a group hasn't discussed it at all. I've participated in probably for the last 10 or 12 years in city government in prior place. We did biannual budgeting. I think I think it works really well. There are, I think, some community, you know, pros and cons. Probably the regularity of kind of connecting to the money and understanding things. I think that can be taken care of in other ways with our monthly financial reports, quarterly other means. The main driving force, I think, from a biennial budgeting isn't really this process. This is a heavy kind of workload to prepare the documents and get everything organized, but that's not the driving force at all, because this has a lot of value to it as well. The driving force really is, I think you get a better budget because you are looking at how capital projects move between fiscals. You have more time within an appropriation period for unforeseen events. It provides a little operational flexibility, but it isn't a deal breaker at all. It's not one that I would advocate hard for and say, you know, if we didn't have biennial budgeting, you know, it's going to cost us tons of extra money and be a big hassle. I think there is value in an annual as well. So just wanted to throw that out there, and I'd love to get everybody's thoughts either now or in I think we'll do a little post-budget survey questionnaire thing for everybody, and we can definitely do a question related to that. So this isn't your only bite at the apple for this particular topic, but my main thing I wanted to say is that council hasn't talked about this all. This is just me as staff throwing a couple ideas out there of, hey, have we thought about that, and what does everybody think? So.
Thank you.
Can I ask one question, Adam? Since you dealt with this previous, do you have any idea as to the percentage of municipalities that deal with biennial budget?
I don't right off the top. I would probably take, I would bet that a really good chunk of the larger cities do biennial. Probably the smaller the city, the more likely they're annual. But I can get that when we get to the conversation, that is a great question to see how typical is it, and is there kind of a sweet spot of size and complexity of a budget where it makes more sense than another? Because yeah, the prior budget, that I was talking about was, it's 170 million a year, so it was a 370 million biennial budget, and the process for putting that together and going through very involved, knockdown, drag out budget meetings, that part of the process did matter, into the calculation of a biennial. I don't see that quite the same in the smaller communities, but the big cities typically are moving towards it if they haven't already.
Thanks.
So in a biennial budget, the budget committee doesn't meet every year?
Correct. There still is an annual audit. An audit has to be done annually, but the budget committee does not meet every year, which, an advantage to, I see to that is when we look at the framework document that we talked about in the last meeting that's in the packet, and in the budget document, it gives a chance to work on those. That's part of the challenge of city government is there are so many things that are cyclical, that are routine, but they dominate our time. And we end up with very little discretionary time to work on some of the tough things like the URA, like financial policies, like our long-term debt situation. That's just a way to free up some time to work on some big picture stuff. So I think what would happen, and what did happen in place I was you make sure that you use that off year, is what we always called it, to grapple with something heavy, and it was typically financial. It just frees you up from being in the confines of a budget process, because a budget process, as you're familiar with from prior, but it's pretty constrained. You don't really do as much as everybody thinks you can do in a budget committee process. So really digging in on future financial things, I think, are actually more productively done outside of a budget committee process and outside of the somewhat restricted ORSs. So that's where that off year, I think, comes in really handy.
And then if you had to do a supplemental budget, you can still do that
Yep.
in the
Yep.
off year.
Yeah, and I think it makes that more likely somewhere in the middle, probably at the 16 to 18 month mark is probably when it typically would have a supplemental, just because you recognize that you clump them together and you say you got a few things that shifted or changed, and you do a supplemental.
And then how would your unallocated or ending fund balance change from year one to year two?
Yeah, the auditors are the only ones that are going to care about that part. The rest of it just flows. It just keeps flowing. So it's a 2-year. But the auditors do make this stop moment in time, and they determine an ending fund balance at that time. But from an appropriation standpoint, it's okay. So there's some back end things that you do for the audit to make all that work.
You still projected unfunded ending balance for the second year and the first year?
You just have you don't really do the in between. You just have, you project it for the 2-year period. You're just having a planning period that is 24 months instead of 12. Again, way early and plenty of time to talk about it at the finance audit. Probably is a great spot to have a recommendation from that group. And, and we'll see whether it makes sense, or maybe we're better off, since I've already and jack things up a little bit anyway. Maybe give another year of an annual, so we have something to at least compare a year to a year, and then there's a comfort level, and it makes sense to do it. So no push, but I definitely wanted to, since I'd been chirping about it, yeah, definitely wanted to at least make sure we're all talking about it.
Thank you. Any other questions on the follow-up information? We will come back to the budget, but we are gonna move on a couple other items after the follow-up here. Okay. One of our items is the minutes approval from May 7th. And I don't think you're gonna be in that one, Jeffrey.
I'll check.
I did review these at home. They look good to me, but have you had a chance to look through, and are there any changes or clarifications to be made?
While everybody's looking, I'll chime in real quick. We're you know, I think Sammy might have mentioned it last meeting, but these are being done in-house now, and to be able to have the turnaround on this and get it between meetings is great. I think this is just indicative of all of our meetings and minutes. I think the quality keeps improving. So
Yes,
kudos to
definitely.
our staff that's taking that on internally. Madison's doing great.
Okay, if there aren't any questions or clarifications, I'll entertain a motion.
Move that we accept the minutes as presented for the May 7th, 2024 Budget Committee meeting.
Second.
Thank you. Okay, it's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes. Don't think there are any questions. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed would say nay. Anyone abstaining? Okay, that passes. And then that moves us to department and programs overview.
Yeah, you know,
Adam,
I spent a good amount of time going over the budget message in meeting one, and also you received the whole packet right at that time. So y'all didn't have a huge opportunity to kind of peruse stuff. So hopefully you've had an opportunity between meetings to peruse the entirety of the packet, which you know, includes, I'll highlight right after the org charts is kind of a highlighted per department, highlights the major functions, the staffing levels, focus areas, and highlights for each department. Wanted to make sure that we had an opportunity at this meeting, after I went over all the overall and really fund-based discussions, which most of a budget really ends up being fund-based, that we have our department head leadership team here who, you know, we're very involved in the development of the budget, but I took up all of last meeting talking and not them, which was kind of the plan, was to give the overview and the big picture and make sure that we're seeing all the trends we need to see here, like I said, on the funds. But budget, the department head staff is here. If there are any particular questions in departments, I'll probably can help myself and chime in a little bit too when if any of those come up. But if there's anything specific that you wanted to hit on with departments, here's your shot. Not your only shot, but here's your shot.
I just have one question under the organizational chart, under the finance director, UB specialist. What does UB stand for?
Utility billing. Yeah, and that dotted line, you know, we're kind of toying with kind of our workloads and workflow, and there's some abilities to have some finance tasks be taken on by Sarah, who's in the utility billing. We haven't locked anything in there. That's why it's highly dotted at this point.
other questions?
About the org chart or about things in general?
departments and then I think I don't want to speak for the chair, but I think the goal was the department kind of specific stuff and then open before we get into maybe the public hearing part on the state revenue sharing. Or I guess before we do the motion on the budget, however the chair wants to do it. But yeah, I'd love to hear all coming.
Okay, so I have, and I just could have gotten an email and I apologize. You had mentioned the diesel gas tax and how other municipalities blend them in with a regular gas tax. And I'm just wondering what the status is, because I think we just absorbed the information that was presented and we didn't have really an analysis of what other communities do. And regardless of this year's budget, I would like to see some analysis of other communities that have truck stops and the diesel tax. So I want to know if we have let something slip and we need to address that.
Yeah, so a couple things. I think that is need to have a bunch of history on both what kind of revenue, what kind of volume of diesel sales and gas sales happen here. What we're collecting, which is in the street, we know what we're collecting, about 150, 170,000 a year. And what other communities are doing. I think that probably to me is housed under and I mentioned it in the memo, that's housed under that framework objective of the 10-year revenue forecast. Talking with the mayor about that just last week. We need to talk about it with council, but after the budget process. But I think having we're finishing up our transportation safety ad hoc committee. I think when that is completed, I think it might make sense to do a revenue analysis ad hoc to look at that being one key one, but that's we want to look at it for all all potential revenue streams for all funds. Look at who are impacted by those rates, what is the cumulative effect of all the rates, and I think the diesel tax is definitely a high priority one to have some good study on, and that's kind of what we tentatively came to when we're looking at kind of work planning things and prioritizing that framework. As I kind of hit it in there, I can't speak for the council, but I'll be promoting that revenue forecast item in our framework is to me a very high priority, as you can tell from the budget message. I've littered all the way through that budget message that we need more revenues. So an ad hoc committee to jump on that topic with staff providing exactly the research you're talking about, I think would be something that should happen within the first part of this coming fiscal year.
Yes, because we've, my memory, we've increased the gas tax twice, and both times we've circumvented the diesel. And the other one was the franchise fees. I don't know how ours compares with other municipalities, but we were at some city powwow meeting, and a guy from Bonita was beating on his chest about how he negotiated such great rates. And I just want to make sure we're in the same vein of good negotiating of great rates.
Yeah, I looked at them. We right now have Pacific Power, that contract, that franchise is going to come to council July. So we have that one up. That one's pretty straightforward. The franchise and the PUC kind of regulates that, puts some limits. We're not, unrestricted in how we apply a franchise. And of course, the thing to remember with the franchise fee is that is directly passed on in the bill to the customer. So it, we're grabbing a chunk of whatever utility that is. I looked at our various ones and they're in line. They're not, there was one, I can't remember now which one was low. It's not up for renegotiation yet. It wasn't majorly low. But typically, around 5% is a pretty typical franchise fee. You have to start making a case for something higher than that. I've seen 7s. Another topic there that is worth discussing is a franchise fee on your own utilities inside the house. That's something that was done where I was prior, where you don't not only charge a franchise fee to external utilities utilizing the right of way, you charge a franchise fee to your own utilities that are using the right of way, because they are using the cities, the general government, the general cities rights of way to conduct their business. Again, what it kind of practically amounts to is water and wastewater ratepayers paying an increment to the general fund. So when we're talking about general fund challenges, that is a legal and perfectly valid methodology to add revenue to the general fund. However, we also will be looking at water and wastewater rate increases for those funds. So you start, and that's where I think you need to look at it holistically and not just one revenue stream at a time, because you'll end up seeing, you know, layering of rates, and they can be really impactful. So you have to balance them. But franchises, you know, are definitely something to keep track of. And there's some other less high dollar parts than just the gross, you know, the gross revenues percentage that I think can go into those negotiations about how they tear up our right of way, when they have to, what they have to do to put it back, how much we charge them for inspections and, you know, follow up and all of that stuff. And again, if we do that to other utilities, we need to make sure we're doing it ourselves as well. So yeah, we'll be seeing some franchise stuff coming up here real soon.
Other questions?
Yes.
So in the municipal court for the proposed budget, we have 100,500 in revenue and 164,600 in expenses. Is that a good thing?
Every court is different in the level of subsidy. It's, you know, there are some courts that are kind of treated as an enterprise that, you know, that are tracked more that way. I think that's not a bad ratio. When I first looked at it, I think that's not a bad ratio. If you tie your activities too much for cost recovery, you know, you're maybe doing things that aren't working for the bigger purpose, which is, you know, the whole justice system. So, and part of that is really due to activity. So you can have a goal of a ratio, you know, 75% cost recovery, or so you can have some goals, but they're really driven by, and this year was very indicative of driven by, I might have mentioned it last meeting, of our being down in officers. When you're not able to issue tickets, not as much action comes through the municipal court, so you don't have as much revenues. You know, I think it's thereabouts. It's a pretty, I think that's solid. I think more of the questions come when they are kind of year after year after year, either cost neutral or in the black. Then you kind of want to question it the other way of what is it doing for its primary mission. So I feel comfortable in looking at that initial assessment of that revenue to expense ratio.
Do we have to do a transfer at the end of the year, or is it okay just to end the fund in black?
They aren't, they're in the general fund. So that is not its own fund. So yeah, I don't have to worry about that part. Yep.
Question on court revenues. Do I remember that the state had decided on some limits to fines and collections, and
There are for different,
that's
there are for
going
different
up.
things, and also there was some mandatory forgiveness of old, you know, of wiping off old ones that hadn't been paid. And so, yeah, the court system is impacted by state regulations. So we don't have total autonomy about how we want to run the court. And there are some of the, if any of you have been unfortunate enough to get tickets or whatever, there is a state assessment that is just a pass through, comes through us and out the door. So you'll see that as, you know, we get the revenue and it goes an expense, you know, right out to the state. So all of that has to be ratcheted down, but you remove the pass through stuff and it makes the total budget a little smaller. But yes, regulated by the state in some areas.
And do you look at that to increase in the future, that they will regulate more? And
Well, the most recent, and we could have a full study session about the topic, is this whole kind of the reactionary to Measure 110 and this deflection thing. And Chief Larson and Mandy, our court administrator, both have gone to some regional up to Salem a week or two ago, and then Chief's going to another thing tomorrow. that one is deflection is an interesting, a new term. Diversion was the term, and now deflection is a new term. And that ends up potentially taking a certain segment of crimes, that could be crimes, and not having them go through the court system. Take up some police time. The whole goal is to have it take up a different skill set people's time rather than police officers' time, but it's way work in progress, that we won't know. I don't know, it's hard to predict right now what a percent of the overall flow through the court would be on the narrow slice of deflection, but that's an example of things that they can go either way. There could be some where, it actually benefits revenues to the courts, but the whole point is revenue and, secondary to the primary mission. And it's really amazing for a community this size to have one at all. And I think that gives Chief Larson and his team a lot more tools to adequately, police the community and uphold, our laws and rules. So it's a big asset, but it is a fair question about how big of a subsidy, at some point, is it too big of a subsidy for the asset that it brings? And that's kind of a, again, another related to the budget, but outside the budget kind of a conversation.
Can I ask a quick question, Adam? Not that I want to get too far down the rabbit hole, but that portion of the fines that you mentioned that passes through right to the state, does the city receive some sort of support from the state? And that's what that portion is representative of?
We are collecting fees on behalf of the state. The same thing as we do on the building permit side. There's a state surcharge for structural, electrical, mechanical, and plumbing, 12%, and that is collected at the time of the permit. It is just immediately moved across, and we fill out a report, and it goes to the state. So, we're collecting revenues on their behalf. I'm sure they would say that they're providing. I mean, I'm only giving one side of the.
Yeah.
That's not very fair. Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
Okay, other questions on the budget? This won't be your final opportunity, but our next item is to move to the public hearing. And the resolution part of it is on page 11. So ORS requires a public hearing be held by the Budget Committee, allowing citizens to discuss possible uses of funds. And it is a formal situation here. So I will open the public hearing for resolution 2024-05, resolution declaring the city's election to receive state revenues at 6:49 p.m. And we have a staff report by Adam.
Yeah, I'll be a little brief, I hope, on this one. It's a kind of a procedural thing. There are two elements that make up the state revenue sharing, the process. One is to make this formal statement that you are eligible and you meet the ORS requirements to be eligible to receive. Not all communities do, almost all do, but there are a few communities in the state that don't meet the criteria to receive the revenue sharing. It ends up happening a funky way through the county for the remainder. But then the second step is to actually say you want to receive them. So you have to say you're eligible in a resolution, and then another resolution say you want them, because then you have to spend them and track them the right way. So this is a public hearing just to ensure that we are eligible and to discuss their potential uses. And I think it used to be a bigger deal when the relative percent of state revenue sharing to the budget was more significant, that it was bigger dollars relatively. They aren't huge dollars, and they keep going down. Liquor tax, the liquor revenues go up slightly. Marijuana tax was not nearly as significant as originally thought. And of course, a lot of that was taken by the state marijuana tax. Local options, the cities that jumped in at the right time and did some locals are receiving some good value. But the revenues are gas tax, cigarette tax, liquor, and some general, I can't remember the state apportioned. but they're primarily general fund. When they're significant in large cities, they will kind of create a nexus between the revenue and what it's funding. These are in most communities, they're small, they're so small that you don't have a 1-for-1 of the revenue to a particular program. So they're basically melded as much as they legally can be melded in. They are melded in as just revenues primarily to the general fund. The street fund gets the gas tax. So that's what those are in general. And big picture, gas tax revenues are flat and declining. So they're not they're not the same relative share of revenue to our expenses as they probably were 20+ years ago. They were a bigger deal back then.
Is that revenue sharing represented as a line item? Adam, I'm looking at the general fund page on page 38. Maybe I'm on the wrong.
Yeah, they're inside, you are correct. They're inside intergovernmental. They're an intergovernmental. Yep. Exactly.
But that's not the totality of that.
That's not the
line.
totality. No, there is some in the street fund as well.
So my recollection is it's about 100,000.
Some, yeah, roughly. Yep. Yep.
Again, varies from year to year.
Right.
Okay, do we have questions?
Another question?
Yes.
So on the Department of Administration, in 2023, we have a personnel services general fund of 508,075, and then 2005 it drops 228,485 to 279,590, and then under the Public Works, the personnel services was 563,245, and it drops to 106,000 minus 456,000. So what was the change there?
Can we park that one? I'll answer that one, but we're in the public hearing for the state revenue sharing. So if we could finish the state revenue sharing, I'll answer that one.
Yes.
Yep.
The questions about the public, about the revenue sharing. And Sammy, do we have anyone signed up to provide public testimony?
We do not.
Then if there aren't any other questions about the revenue sharing, I will close the public hearing at 6:54 p.m. And a second public hearing will be held June 11th at the 2024 June 11th City Council meeting. Okay, so there will be another one of those.
And that's where both resolutions get actually approved by council. Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Thank you. All right, so then, as we are moving closer to whether we're ready to recommend the budget, now we are ready for additional budget questions.
Want me to jump into the answer? You don't need to ask it again. That was.
Let's answer that.
If we were a half an hour apart, maybe I'd have to ask it. But it's 100% due to how we're allocating the staff costs. So in prior years, the allocation of staff, all of the staff costs were in the general fund, and then they were allocated out to the departments by transfer, or out to the funds and departments by a transfer. The methodology is nearly the same, but what we're doing in this budget is a direct allocation rather than having them all in the general fund and then once a year or quarterly or whatever dole them out with transfers. We're directly allocating them. So every payroll starting in July, and then in every monthly financial report, you'll see direct cost allocations for the people costs, where they live and where they do their work. And so like the three of us here, we are roughly, it's not quite this, but a third in the general fund and a third in the utilities, or a third and a third in the major utilities. Some of the like Brian's staff, we're directly allocating them in. They each have a lead department within Public Works that they operate, and that's 70% of their total compensation goes to the lead, and then 10% to each of the other three, because they are backups and group members of all of that. So it's basically the same as what happened prior. The difference being that we're directly allocating them rather than holding them all in the general fund and then transferring. So the other effect of that, aside from being more real time and current, is that the overall budget is reduced somewhat, because when you do transfers with governmental accounting, transfers add to the overall bottom line of a budget. So it kind of artificially inflates a total budget. So that's another reason why you see the budget kind of smaller. The capital projects are the main reason this budget is smaller, but that's a secondary reason.
I thought we started doing that about 2 years ago when Ann was here. We started making those changes.
I think what happened, the methodology happened, but they were still done as a transfer. So the methodology of that assigning percentages of people to the different places, that was in 21, either 20 or 21. So the only difference with this is just purely the accounting part of that. We made a little bit of tweaks that we'll be proposing about how the changes in the percent allocation, but that's really minor. The significant change is it's just a direct allocation rather than than the transfers. But you're right, the resolution that created all of that was either 20 or 21. And it works well. We're still doing that with the non-personnel people costs. So the like software and some of the stuff that applies across, those are still done on a transfer. I think the goal would be to take as many of those that are kind of fixed, that we know about, that are pretty static, and do those as direct as well. So the idea being, take as much direct as makes possible sense to, and then allocate on a transfer the rest of them.
Okay. Other questions? Now is the time.
Some of you have another shot at it.
True, that's true. If we don't have other questions, I am happy to entertain a motion. And just a reminder that we actually are recommending this to City Council, and they will approve the budget.
What you are doing is setting the tax rate. I think we talked about that in meeting one, which used to be a much more substantial thing for a budget committee when it could be changed. There's not anything really to be changed anymore. So you are actually, the budget committee is authorized and the only entity that can actually set the tax rate. And that's why the motion includes that. And the technical terms, I use the term recommend also in the budget, but you're actually approving the budget. Council is adopting the budget. So it's kind of it is, but practically the same thing.
More that we are recommending this
Right.
approval than actually.
Yeah, the budget committee
Or approving.
Right. The budget committee isn't the final say on this document, but they are by ORS approving the budget, and council can, without taking it back to this committee, there's some constraints on how much they can change it without it coming back to the budget committee. But they can make some changes without it coming back.
Sorry, but I guess I just got one more question. So on the citywide budget in 2025, we're at 14,700,000, but in 2026, we're down $3 million. And that's not all from the dwindling general fund.
Thank you for that. It was when we went over the packets, one thing that I needed to say, the packet tonight, the budget documents have two updates on them. The first 2 pages are updated. So right after the department highlighted pages, so page 28 and 29 of tonight's packet, you'll see the proposed budget number is 12,154,154, which is really weird. It was 153, but you rounded up. The packet that we sent out on the first meeting has the number that you just referenced, the 14 million. And the reason for that, we caught in between meetings, was our goal coming into this budget process was to make SDCs their own funds, pull SDCs out. But the problem with that, and I mentioned it in the first meeting, was when you pull those out, you end up with negative fund balances in the funds, and you can't do that. So we're not able to actually do what we were wanting to do, which was to separate out these restricted funds we had to keep them in. And so these two citywide presentations had the SDCs counted as separate funds in the formula and as mingled in with the funds. So SDCs were counted twice. So that's the difference between that 14 million and the 12,154. So we've stripped the second counting of the SDCs out of this number. So just to correct that, but your point remains is, that there is a significant reduction, and it is, capital, that is the primary, reduction. And as you look at the 26, 27, 28 fiscal years, those clearly are not fully built out, projections. They give indications of what the futures look like. But because there will be some capital in there. We've given our best thoughts at what capital will look like, but those aren't final numbers. But you do see it shrinking, and partly it's shrinking because of the transfers that I talked about, and it's mostly shrinking because of capital, and a little bit of shrinkage because the development revenue isn't as strong. And we need to talk about revenue streams to enable debt service, and then it will be bigger again. So yeah, it's really not a good sign, that the budget amounts go down. What it shows you more is really a closer reality of what just operations and maintenance of the city costs, because that's what this comes closer to, as you see in future years. This is us doing little in the way of capital. So I think it's fair to say that we're a $7 or $8 million status quo operations and maintenance only operation, but we have a significant, for a small community especially, a very significant amount of infrastructure that we're behind on, just like every other city in the state is behind on, and we have to figure out how much we can scrap and claw to be less behind on. We were talking about as a group this afternoon that a budget that would put us to put every piece of infrastructure at the fair, not great or good category, but at the fair category across all of our utilities, is a far different looking budget than this budget. So this clearly is not a budget that gets us to probably what we may aspire or assume we can, is to say that we'll catch up and get all of our infrastructure in a fair condition. This doesn't do it, which is why we really have a lot, and there's a lot beyond what we can do in this room to make that happen. I'm on a couple of statewide committees. There's a lot of federal work. I mean, it's if you pop onto other cities that either you visit or people from and read their budget message, you'll hear a similar thing, that budgets that are being put forward are not budgets that address the infrastructure needs of their communities. Some are taking better stabs at it, or able to take better stabs at it than others. But it's a challenge across the board. So I kind of moved off of your question and started a little soapboxing. So, sorry.
I could have stopped you, but we kind of want to hear what you're thinking too. So. Other questions?
Chair,
Yes.
if I might, I do know that we have all of our department people
Yes.
here, our managers, our leadership team. I heard from some of you that you always like hearing from them. I wonder if there are specific questions or any message that you would like to hear from our leadership team about what's going on in their departments, or what their challenges or what their forecasts are. As Adam said, he would do the lion's share, but
Mhm.
we have them here and you wanted them,
We're
so.
paying them, right?
Absolutely.
Who wants to go first?
So what do you want to hear from them, I guess?
Yes, what questions do you have?
I would be interested in just hearing what the, major challenges that they foresee in their departments are.
Agree.
Agree. Okay, sounds good.
Chief, do you want to start us off?
Alphabetical, or how do you want to do it? Yeah.
So the police department, we feel very comfortable with the budget that Adam's put together. We've done it as a team. Challenges for law enforcement is I can never predict what crime is going to be. Had a couple major incidents not too long ago, as most of you know, that was abnormal, which we'd like to keep it that way. But we just have a tremendous amount of outside influence on the city of Coburg, and we're prepared for it as best we can. Some of the, couple of the incidents were pretty large. So we have a great working relationship with other agencies, so that's an asset. So I'm always trying to work well with other agencies, Eugene, Springfield, Lane County, OSP. The crime scene on the shooting here in town was very large, probably, I don't know, 4 or 5 blocks at least. So that was beyond our scope. And so part of my job is to know when that happens. And I knew that had happened, which is why we have a good relationship with other agencies. So training is always an issue because they're always changing the requirements and we're just adapting and overcoming. So the guys are out there working hard. Jason graduates the academy, Officer Smith graduates the academy, I think the 19th of June or 21st, that Friday. So he's almost there.
One thing that Chief and I talked about to add in is in terms of pure budget conversation, and it's this way with all police departments and mostly all public safety, is the amount of the chief's budget that is actually discretionary is tiny. So you have staff is the #1 driving force of any police department, and you have dispatch, which actually we get a pretty good deal, better than I would have thought. I know it's still a big dollar amount, but I've seen a lot more. And then you have fleet and you have mandatory training. So once you take the dollars for those out, what you are left with is, what you would call somewhat discretionary. And my bet would be that number is about 5 to 8% of his overall budget. So and it's not super different in other departments. It's a little different, but it's pretty acute in a police department. So that leaves Chief with having to be very strategic about all of the equipment, all of the stuff when it's time to move up and, change technology and on tasers and body cameras and all those things. It's a real challenge. So I just for kind of perspective on how the budgeting goes and how we kind of pinch and move and say, okay, which one is the worst of the bunch that we have to upgrade and lift because, they all need their tools.
All right, thank you.
One last question, in terms of just overall revenue, has it been pretty flat in the last few years or has it had a?
That's a core revenue. We went through this years ago when the city had a reputation of being out on the freeway and was kind of a generating revenue type force, which is not the purpose of law enforcement. So revenue is what it is.
It is what it is, yeah.
Right. Traffic enforcement, we're pretty active. I think the other day, most people probably saw down by Coburg Pizza, we did a traffic operation as far as pedestrian crossing. We have a grant to pay for some overtime for that. So we do a lot of traffic in Coburg. Probably 500 stops a year or more. That's a lot. It's a lot for a small city, but you have tremendous outside influence. People coming in off the freeway, coming through town, through Coburg to go to McMinnville. It's just amazing to me how many people come through town. I think one day on the speed trailer we have set down there, or we just moved it today, but one day there was like 2,500 cars in one day going by that little spot. So over a week or a month period of time, you have a lot of traffic coming through town, a lot of people.
We appreciate the presence.
Oh,
We saw it there last week.
Yeah, we bought new batteries, so the trailer is charging appropriately, and so it's gonna be moved around a lot, so thank you.
Thank you.
From revenues, of course, police departments are property tax, dominant in their funding, general fund, so they don't have their own dedicated revenues. There is some grants, and then the contract that we have with Harrisburg it's a revenue, but it shifts, our ability to our service levels here too. So probably 8% revenue, so 90 to 92% of the cost of a police department is directly from property taxes.
The fines go to general fund.
Fines go to general fund. There's always a debate, and as Mandy is stepping up, there's always a debate about whose are they? Are they police or are they courts? When you talk about that number you were talking about the level of subsidy for municipal court, those are, you know, fines that are generated out in the field there, but there's a whole lot of work to get them through to fruition. So there is a friendly debate, I think, historically about who gets to count them, because you can't double count them. You can't both have revenues. So
I guess so when court comes in, we don't use the word revenue because we're not a revenue generating business. It's not what we're here. We're here to have justice in the community and take care of our citizens. So when you say revenue, when budget starts to come, it's like, that's not even a word we use. Like the judge and I don't use it. It's what comes in, a lot of it goes right back out. I have not only, like Adam said, as a state cost, I have county costs that go automatically. It's a $16 per site or per violation that goes automatically right to the county. Same with the $50 that goes per violation to the state. There are some other state mandated costs. If there's misdemeanors involved, driving under the influence, there's a Dewey conviction fee of $255. That goes right to the state. Basically what happens is at the end of the month, we have a line item that says this is how much we took into that source. And that's what I send up to Greg, and Greg sends them a check on their little voucher. So that goes in and out, just like he explained. Our biggest thing is the state legislature changes. I think we wrote off $35,000 from the last governor's order that ended in December. So those are citations that they owe nothing on, and we just close them all out. That's happened now 2 years in a row. So last December before, they did another one. It was a smaller one, but then when the new governor came in, she made it a wider spread accumulation of cases. So we just have to wipe those off. So a lot of that, not only do our officers citations, but a lot of that controls what we actually keep in-house. There are other costs that stay in department. I also have my technology costs that comes in per citation, and that goes directly to my software company. That's how we paid for it, because in a small community, we couldn't come up with $30,000 to bring in a software program. So it's charged on everybody's citation. So that's another one that goes in and out. And that I'm assuming in the next few years, along with the state funds, I have a feeling those are going to go up. The state hasn't been touched since 2018. So I have a feeling those are going to be hiked back up here probably in the next 5 years. I can't imagine the state's going to wait too much longer. The county one hasn't changed much. But yeah, this one's been a hard year. This has been the lowest year since I've been here, and that's been 10 years. When we had 2 officers out at the same time, one that left that we haven't filled, one that was out on admin stuff, it makes, I think I had one court date, I had 3 citations. That makes a huge impact in the court's monies that come in. But yeah, we don't call it revenue in the court world, because that's not why we're here. We're not here to generate money for the city. It's really public safety. But like Larry said, we're really trying to, the judge and I and Larry are all trying to work really hard. I have my jail beds, but we really try and use community service, because community service doesn't cost us anything. So those people that can do those options, some obviously habitual offenders don't necessarily get to do community service, but if we have people around here that can do some of that, we'd rather do that than send them to jail for cost reasons. So there's a lot of things. There's a lot of things that make my job harder, but the legislature is one of the biggest. Because if you're not on top of that, you're under legal scrutiny, you're under, people can sue the city, people can come after your job. So many things that you have to be right on top of, especially when it comes to the money part of it.
We did allocate a little more funding for jail beds. We
We did.
increased that.
So over the years, jail beds have increased just like everything else, and we've backed off a little bit. But I can tell you right now, this year, we had so many individuals that needed that, we went over budget on it. So, we're back to square one as trying to get more jail beds. I just got my new contract, and it even went up, even from when I estimated on my budget, it went up $15 more a night. So that's not even in my budget, and that starts July 1.
And that's Springfield, right?
And we use Springfield. So the county, the reason we don't use county, which is free, but they go in and before the officers even leave to come back to Coburg, they're out the door. They just don't hold municipal charges for us. So the only means we have is to pay for Springfield beds, and they do their time that they're told they have to do.
Must be the cost of groceries.
Cost of
Everything's gone up.
Everything.
Let's just, we all know that at home. We all know that wherever we are.
I did, in my contract I just received, that I forwarded today. So it's $144 a night at the Springfield jail, which was 130, don't quote me, it was 133 or 136 last year. But I was able to get them for the first time to give me a 2-year contract.
Oh, good.
So at least, because that's the problem, I do my budget and then they don't give me a contract till now. So, you know, I could really use $400 more on my budget. So it's just one of those games you play. But anything else?
Back in the timeline day, the fines assessed by the court were not diligently recouped. And so there was a lot of backlog, and then we started using collection agency and stuff. Has that all been recovered or wiped off the books?
It's not all wiped up. So I think they went with a collection agency in 2007, I believe is when we first submitted. It was like, I want to say $2 million worth of fines that we submitted back then because
Not very assertive.
they had never used any side of collections. I don't know the exact amount. I really am trying to do my diligence on making sure that we don't have what we shouldn't have on the books. We close out and purge cases that are 20 years old. So if a case has been adjudicated today, then hopefully in 20 years and about 6 months, because I usually give it about 6 months before I start purging, and I purge all those. So we should be pretty close to those original fines that were turned to collections. But you have another handful that just, I mean, it just keeps going. Oh, I would say we're probably more towards $1 million that we've got in collections. The past two fines.
And you give us a report every month.
So I give you a report that shows you what we've received in revenue from collections for that month, as well as what we've turned over to collections.
Yep.
So I hope we recoup the not so much the amount, because the amount of citations that we had back then were really crazy. So I'm hoping we're getting our status back and employing justice rather than trying to be that revenue builder. That's been my goal since I've been here. So.
Well put.
But when I first started, every conference was, oh, you're Coburg. And I think I've gained my reputation. And so I think I'm
Some
doing
people
pretty
say,
good.
oh, you're Coburg.
Well, now I get that, but you know, now they want me involved in their conversations because how do we do what we do when we're so small with one person? But I think I've overcome that old history.
It's a long time.
Yeah, I'm trying. Anything else?
Thank you.
You gonna leave Brian for last?
Well, he always takes the longest. Yeah.
He's scratching notes out there.
Evening Budget Committee. I would say that the biggest challenges facing the planning department are state mandates, limited resources, and unpredictable development. So, you know, things like the building permit program, the city is required to have to provide building permit services. That can be a very costly endeavor. Our contract with Cottage Grove is a flat fee each year, regardless of how many inspections or reviews that they do. Similarly, we are working through the process with some state mandated rulemaking, the climate friendly and equitable communities, which a lot of it is eligible for staff time reimbursement, but it still takes up a lot of staff time. And so there's a balance there between managing regular day-to-day operations. And then just trying to determine in the budget process what we think might be on the horizon for next year. And how do we match what is needed to make sure that we can adequately process that.
How
Yes,
has the Cottage Grove relationship worked out?
fantastic. I have a great working relationship with the folks in Cottage Grove. I've heard a lot of positive feedback from developers in the community about working with them. So I would say that it's going very well.
They do 2 other cities besides themselves, so there are 4 cities, so we pay a ratio or a portion based on, I think, population or maybe some historical activity levels. But there's a formula by which we pay, and I think we pay 15% of the total building program of Cottage Grove.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And they also provide the same services to Veneta and Crestwell.
Yeah, it's a really, from my perspective, really good system. We in prior place, we were the community that did it to others, and I like this setup. I think the administrative side is really good as well.
And that was
I
a
would agree.
state mandate 2-3 years ago to have the building inspector either to have one internally or to contract, if I
The
recall.
building official, right? The building official, you can do other
Exactly.
inspections differently, but yeah.
The cheapest
Really?
way to do
Time
it,
flies.
the most cost effective was to hire somebody.
Right.
Share something.
Share,
rather
exactly,
than
exactly.
Trying to have someone intern.
Yeah, and I think the partnership works very well.
I'd add really quickly that Megan also is our internal grant writer extraordinaire. So things that aren't even necessarily in the planning world, she's a fabulous asset for applying for grants. So that's been a super added asset, and it's gotten, when we're talking revenue, that's gotten us revenue. Yeah. Tammy and I are attached at the hip for all of the, yeah, so ask one of us and you get it.
Like a ventriloquist game.
Yeah.
Well, good evening. Just a couple things to hit on. I think that this next fiscal year, we're going to be prioritizing stormwater, water quality, street trees. There'll be an emphasis on those areas. Obviously trying to, push forward and get the ops center finished, and all of the open projects that are still out there, the water master plan projects. Some street preservation. We're going to be working with Lane County on doing some of that preservation work for us. So we're really looking forward to using partnerships in the next fiscal year.
Not free, unfortunately.
Not
for Lake
free.
County,
It's
but-
not
but
free.
a good-
I'm not gonna leave that part out. It's not free. It is cheaper.
Yeah.
But not free. Aging infrastructure, I think, is the biggest concern that we have. And that'll be a concern that we have, even though the sewer system is still kind of in its infancy. The pumps that are in everybody's step system, their life expectancy is 15 to 20 years. Well, we're at 10. So, over the next few years, you're going to see higher and higher maintenance. Some of those equipment maintenance lines are going to increase. So we try really hard to, I think the crew does a fabulous job on the preventative maintenance when we can. So it's a matter of reactive and proactive maintenance approach. And I think they do a great job at balancing those two. So really, the focus is just try and get as many of these capital projects done that we have on the books, done and out of the way, with not overburdening ourselves with project overload, because that's what we've seen over the last few years. So we're trying to pump the brakes a little bit, get some things done, and keep the ball moving forward. Does anybody have any questions?
Where are we on the operations building?
So yeah, the skeleton is up. I think we'll probably share some pictures with you at city council meeting. But when I was out there this afternoon, the framework for the main ops building is up. It's so yeah, we're looking at probably into August before the crew can move in and live in the building.
That's gonna be a huge benefit operationally. It'd be great for our rolling stock to be covered and just so many big and small advantages with that project being done. So that was great. But we're feeling the pinch of the cash funding that. The good part is there's no debt, but we're in the kind of the middle of the cash funding crimp on all of our funds. So when that's gone, we get a little more wiggle room and that'll be fun to get that thing dialed out.
Yeah. Yep. So we're excited about that. We're excited about getting the street sweeper inside, backhoe inside, those things out of the weather. So they'll last a lot longer than they would if they were just left outdoors.
Can I just say thank you?
Yes, you certainly can.
You, to each and every one of you, really, you all do a fantastic job, but I so enjoyed over this Memorial Day weekend, the flags everywhere, the memorial, the Veterans Memorial was just gorgeous. And I know that takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of work from each and every one of you to keep this city going. So thank you.
Well, you're welcome. No more questions? Okay.
The sewer.
Thanks, Brian.
So Brian, I do have, one of the things that keeps me awake at night is worrying about the sewer treatment plant and the membranes and how are we doing with those?
So Adam and I have had some conversations about, all right, we've made something that the membranes themselves have a lifespan of 7 to 10 years. We're at 10. They're still doing very, very well. We have them inspected by the manufacturer every year. They still look like they are brand new. Now, we know that they will not last that way forever. We just know that. So we have to have a plan for replacement, and that plan is coming down the road. So when Adam and I were talking, my plan is 14 years. So you probably didn't see anything in that 3-year forecast.
It's just outside of.
It's just outside that. So this time next year, when we're looking at those 3 years, if we're still doing that, or if we go to the biennial budget, you'll see that in that last year. So that's a big hit, you're probably looking at a little over $300,000 for replacement. So it's a big deal. But once they're replaced, then we have a process in place for replacement, and that will be self-funded every, 14 years.
And that right there connects with the URA conversation from earlier about is there a strategy, financial benefit to bring a higher amount of URA money earlier so we can tee ourselves up for that, fund balance ourselves stable, and then the rate increases will handle the stuff after the membranes, because the membranes are kind of this key thing that we have a pretty good idea when it's going to land. So all that conversation kind of feeds together.
Yep. And we do keep a pretty healthy contingency. If something catastrophic were to happen, we have that to kind of fall back on. I don't think that's going to happen. So 14 years.
Could be healthier.
So up until now, we haven't been squirreling money away to fund the membrane.
You want to take that one?
No, we have not.
But moving forward into the future, we will have a plan for that.
Multiple, I think it's a multifaceted thing. You just like all these other ones it'll be a combination of rates, the URA and potential debt service. The hard part is the wastewater fund, like I said in the first meeting, is got the highest debt load of any of the funds. So, but it's also in general, the newest infrastructure. But there are some key components that we know we need to address and have a plan for. So I don't think it's sky is falling at all. It's just kind of resetting kind of the matrix of different revenue streams and getting our timing to match up. And of course, that's always best laid plans. You never know exactly. But I think we have some good options, and that'll be part of that revenue conversation.
No other questions? Okay, thank
Anybody
you.
wants to know how much each pump is if in our sewer step system?
No.
No.
No?
No. Bad news.
Right, was enough.
For those.
For what, 500 of them, 400 of them? Yeah, we've got a few.
Okay, so were you going to cover administration or whatever?
Oh, I can. You guys all hear from me and see me a lot. Challenges administratively, I think we're kind of an open book to you all, but one thing we talked about at leadership team just a week or two ago was the idea of all of our kind of back office work that we're doing is really, to build up some scalability in how we operate and govern on the administrative side. We're not always going to be 1,400 population. We've got annexed land out there that are some big players are kicking the tires on that could lead to some significant development. So a lot of what we're doing on the behind the scenes is really building our systems in a way that we are scalable, so we don't have to add staff and keep older kind of legacy stuff going that is usually staff heavy to do that. If we can switch our systems over and become a little more scalable with technology, the idea is that then our administration team can more incrementally grow or hopefully for a long time not necessarily grow in FTE, but we're better able to scale it out over time. And so that's a big thing that we're doing, and one that Greg's in the midst of right now on the payroll side is going to Springbrook with payroll. We've got just a variety of things, and really that framework document that we talked about in the first meeting, that is admin's kind of marching orders is to organize that into really a support role to everybody at the back circle table there. We put the stuff together to hopefully allows them to do their jobs as well as they want to do their jobs and as professionally as they are. So scaling up, being able to scale, I think and it'll take us years, the codification project that Sam and I are talking about, getting all of our various ordinances into an actual municipal code. It's essential. It's super important. It's also way more time consuming than you'd imagine. But really a good project. We need to update we got to refresh completely our website. We've got logo conversations that are kind of which order of operations do we do all these various things. We just have a lot of things in a lot of irons in the fire. Trying to think of other elements. I guess, really that framework covers the totality of everything that we touch, and we're touching everything to hopefully make sure that everybody else can meet all their regulatory mandates, get ahead of the curve, and maintain existing service levels, and then grab onto a few others where we can. That's the tall order, is just maintaining existing service levels across the organization. But I think we're
even these indirectly those regulatory like our audit for year after year, that's in the state tack on more and more and more, so it becomes more cumbersome.
It's a great example. Yep.
So although we may not have a lot of direct I think structure how we do it, moving forward our technology and that application structure and everything.
And some of those things we're working on in financial policies actually impact our bond rating. We want to make sure that, we did drop a notch. We want to, we've got some things that are in that framework document that will hopefully the next cycle of that, I think it's a 3-year cycle, get it, move that up a notch. It's not a deal killer where we went. But those are smart things to be doing. And it does, again, it gives us scale and gives us the ability to have more, more access to funds, at a cheaper price. So, yeah, all of those systems things, but that audit's a great example that we face in every industry that we have in our umbrella, is the regulatory construct, as Mandy said it, as as Larry said it, as Brian and as Megan, everybody, all of us, the regulatory, what we do on a day-to-day basis is so much more governed by external forces than what we decide ourselves in here. We get to, we don't get to say what we do. We at least get to say somewhat in how we do it is what we get to do here. But what we do is governed, and regulated, outside of us, and we have to react to it and make sure our systems are as efficient as we can to comply. And these grants, even the free money, that's a lot of work. So admin is super busy all the time, and hopefully you all have a pretty good knowledge of what we're doing, because it's really fulfilling policy goals of council and the support needs to the departments. We're in the middle of those two things.
Thank you. Other questions for Adam, or budget questions? Everybody's pretty quiet all of a sudden.
Well, do you want me to keep talking?
No. So, if we have enough information tonight, that could bring us to a motion.
Seeking a motion?
And there is a motion there that could be read. You want to make the motion?
I move to approve the budget for 24-25 fiscal year in the amount of $12,154,150. Nice cadence there. $4. And approve the property taxes for the 24-25 fiscal year at the rate of $3,700 and
No.
$3.
$3. 75.06. It's a period missing. Per $100 of assessed value, categorized as subject to the general government limitation.
Great. Good job on that. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Jeffrey. All right, any questions before we vote?
I'd like to amend the motion to $1,000 of assessed value, rather than 100.
Oh,
I just misspoke.
oh, I missed that myself. Actually, I thought the 3,000 might relate to
Yeah,
the
make
sewer
up
thing
the
that I
stuff.
didn't want to know about there for a minute. Okay. So, that was just an aside, but okay, so it isn't really amended. It was just misread. Is that correct? In
Yes.
the order? Okay. So the original motion and the second are still okay then?
As long as the second's okay.
Yeah.
All right, great.
Sammy's, yep.
Okay, any other questions, clarifications before we vote? Okay, all those in favor, aye?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstain? Okay, great. Well, the motion passes to approve the budget. And it will next go to council. That's not quite the end of our business. But I will say a lot of times as we get to the end, we do a little input on how the budget process went. But I heard Adam say we are gonna have a budget committee survey thing, so I think that's great.
Great.
So we won't do that part. We'll move on to the next item. Budget committee annual recruitment. Sammy.
Hi. This is an annual vacancy. So every 2 years, the ORS requires that we have 6 electors on our budget committee. Every 2 years, 2 of the guys terms expire. This year it happens to be Linda Krager and Elise Laundry. We opened our recruitment up and mid-April, we took applications up until today. only received 2 applications. Those were for Linda Krieger and Elise Bond. I did have a couple other people interested, which was really kind of nice. But they didn't turn their applications in. So, all of you guys have done this process before. Budget committee had requested to be more involved with the process because of when they meet and being able to make their recommendations to council. So it's always been a standing agenda item on the agenda for the last meeting. So you have the 2 applications attached there.
Where are they, by the way?
Where
Are the applications?
There's a separate handout that was,
Oh, I think it's this one. It's behind the highlighted.
I see it. I guess I didn't get it.
In my packet.
Thank you. So I guess that gives folks an opportunity to ask questions of the applicants if you wish.
I just want to thank you for reapplying. Appreciate that, both of you.
You're welcome. And if there's not any questions of the applicants, I'll entertain a motion.
I move to recommend that the mayor appoint Linda and Elise to serve a term of 3 years on the Coburg Budget Committee expiring the end of June 2027. Second.
Any questions on that? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstaining? Okay, that passes. All right, anything else for the good of the order before I adjourn? I will say thank you to everyone for your hard work, great questions, your time. Staff as well, as we've heard. Thank you. I adjourn at 7:42 p.m.
all right.